Hi everyone, welcome back to English 221, and this is for our class for Wednesday, the 24th, where I wanted to talk about Macbeth and also our paper. So at this point, all of you should have received your paper number 1 back. So if it turns out that you submitted in a paper and didn't receive it, please let me know. And as you know, you all have the option of rewriting that paper, and you have up until the ending of the semester, which is coming sooner rather than later at this particular point in time. And I wanted to talk a little bit about where we are in terms of our syllabus. I wanted to put some closure onto Macbeth next class and begin Othello, and then spend the rest of the classes talking about Othello. Our very last class on the 8th is devoted to our final examination. So if you are a returning student in GCC, you might have remembered that in the past, what we had was an entire week devoted to the final exam period. And instead, what's happened is we've eliminated that week. We've extended the class sessions a bit so that the very last class could be devoted to the final exam. The final exam will be an essay exam, and it will be open book, open notes. So basically, it'll be a way for you to synthesize some of the major themes and ideas that we've been talking about over the course of the semester in terms of Shakespeare. And if we were taking this as a face-to-face class, you'd have approximately 2 hours to take the final exam. But this is not a face-to-face class. This is a online class. So I will give you 24 hours which to take the final. I will be posting it on the 8th, which is Wednesday. It'll be due on the 9th, which is Thursday. And I don't expect you to spend more than 2 hours on this exam. The idea behind the exam, again, is a way for you to synthesize major points. I don't expect your writing to be as well done or as polished or as developed as what you might do in a paper. And as you know, your second paper is going to be very similar to what you did with your first paper, the distinction being that you would talk about a different play. So for the first paper, you had the options of A Midsummer Night's Dream or Much Ado About Nothing. And if you wanted to talk about sonnets, I asked you to touch base with me. And it was a possibility. It's just writing about sonnets is a very different kind of thing. So where we are is either writing about the plays that follow. So that would be The History of Richard II, or one of the two tragedies, and that would be either Macbeth, which is where we are now, or Othello, which is what's coming up. That said, I had a last class devoted to The Tempest. I won't take the entire class for The Tempest. It's extra credit, and I will put an extra credit a question on the examination, the final examination, if it turns out that you so wanted to earn a little bit of extra credit on the final. But the idea behind The Tempest, I just wanted to let you know that it exists and talk about some of the reasons why it's an important play. But I encourage you to read it on your own if you ever are inclined to do so. And certainly if you decided to do something like that prior to the final exam, you could attempt to answer the final exam question on The Tempest, and that could earn you some extra credit points, up to 10 extra credit points, by the way. And in terms of performance, what we've been doing is watching the Royal Shakespeare Company with Macbeth. When it comes to Othello, we're not going to be seeing a performance in its entirety. What I'm going to be doing is showing you various clips from various kinds of performances now that we have a good overview of different kinds of ways to produce and to act out Shakespearean plays. And Othello's a tricky play, as we will talk about, because it is about a Moor, a black man, who marries a white woman, the fair Desdemona. And in the past, productions have cast Caucasian actors wearing dark makeup or even blackface. So we'll talk about some of the problems associated with that. Of course, more modern productions aren't doing that. I'm greatly relieved to say. And one of the things that I also wanted to talk about in terms of Othello, and one of the ways that could assist you with absorbing a play, is not necessarily watching a production, but listening to a production. There are audio versions of the plays that are available that you can listen to and done by professional actors so that you can really concentrate on the language and not necessarily get distracted by the visuals. And I will give you a link to one of those when it comes to Othello in the event that you wanted to listen to an audio. It takes place over about the length of a play itself, so about a 3 hour audio or so, but you can get through the entire play in that way. I can share with you that this was actually the way that I studied for final exams in my Shakespeare classes when I was an undergraduate, is that I would listen to all of the audios of the plays prior to the final examination as a way of rereading the plays. And just to give you an idea of when that would have occurred, I was listening to them on vinyl. But nevertheless, now, of course, we can stream. I found it to be a very useful way to review the plays. Certainly not necessarily a first read through, but if you wanted to, you could actually have the text in front of you and read along as the audio version is going. And that will be for Othello, though, of course, there are many audio versions available for all of the plays, just like the Royal Shakespeare Company has done many versions of Macbeth and other Shakespearean plays. But the version that I focused on was the 1972 version with Ian McKellen, a great Shakespearean actor. And one of the reasons why is because it's such a haunting production. As you saw right from the very beginning, the witches are portrayed as so evil and so disturbing. And this is a disturbing play. It's a very short play. King James would have been the new ruler in power now that Queen Elizabeth had passed. And King James liked shorter plays, and also King James was very interested in the supernatural, and King James was from Scotland. So it's no surprise that Macbeth sort of checks off all of those categories as Shakespeare's shortest play about a king from Scotland, and also a play that features the supernatural. We had talked about some of the superstitions associated with Macbeth, so much so that in stage folklore, you're not supposed to say the name Macbeth. You call it the end play or the Scottish play. And in terms of seeing this play, I had one other piece that I wanted you to view about the production. It's about, I think, 15 minutes or so, actually 12 minutes to be exact. And you can see this in our notes below in the third section. It's one of the more famous speeches in the play, the Tomorrow speech. And Ian McKellen, the actor who plays Macbeth, reflects a little bit on how he prepared for that speech in the Royal Shakespeare Company version of Macbeth, which I think is absolutely fascinating. How an actor, and again, McKellen is Shakespearean trained, the thought process they go through in order to become their character. So that's a 12-minute video. What I wanted to talk about a little bit today are some of the major elements of the plot of Macbeth, and we can finish up with quotation next class and begin to talk about Othello. And as you know, Macbeth begins with 3 witches. You probably notice that 3 is a very significant number in this play. There will be a lot of repetition of 3s, and 3 oftentimes is a number that's associated with Christianity. Think Trinity. The witches could be a kind of unholy trinity. The idea of 3 also works so nicely in terms of time, the past, the present, and the future. And what we have is a play of equivocation, where nothing is directly stated, it's merely implied, and it's filled with paradox, seeming contradictions. So what we're told initially is that fair is foul, and foul is fair. And that sets the scene for a play that's filled with disease and decay and murder. Notice that at the beginning of the play, it's the witches who approach Macbeth and Banquo. So one of the questions that I had asked you is, could we see perhaps the witches as an outside force in that they pursue Macbeth, at least initially, and give Macbeth the prophecy? Of course, they never tell Macbeth that he has to take action based on that prophecy, so he does have free will. He makes that jump, and he makes it rather quickly, which makes one think that perhaps Macbeth had been contemplating the idea of being king. And as you know, one became king through birthright. It would be the God anointed. So Macbeth's contemplation and eventual placement as king really usurps the idea of the chain of being, that hierarchy that every person and living entity basically placed on in the idea of Renaissance society. And the irony, and there's a lot of irony in this play, is that Macbeth has established himself as a great warrior. In fact, he's defeated a traitor, the Thane of Cawdor. And of course, Macbeth is going to become a traitor as well as the play progresses. And there are prophecies for Macbeth, and there are prophecies for Banquo, and Banquo is suspicious, and rightly so, because witches at the time would have been associated with evil, and not like fairies, which would have been associated with mischief. However, Macbeth is not at all suspicious. In fact, he's quite eager, and also concerned over the fact that his heirs will not be taking over the kingdom. It's Banquo's heirs. Now, there's never any mention of Macbeth having children. Again, that's perhaps one of the more famous literary questions, almost like asking how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. No answer to that. The literary equivalent of that is, how many children does Lady Macbeth have? And there are no reference to children, although of course she's got that wonderful scene where she talks about that she wants to basically bash in the brains of the suckling babes so that she can dismiss any element of softness or femininity within her, so that she can take action, which means murder in effect. And we know that this play is very different than Richard II with the way Macbeth approaches Lady Macbeth to tell her about the prophecies. He addresses her in a letter, "My dearest partner of greatness." This is not what we saw in Richard. We definitely saw a male-centric world. And in this play, we've got two equals who are ruling. So we've got a strong female character, albeit quite evil. So I don't know what that says. And of course, Lady Macbeth's famous "Unsex Me Here," where she's talking about bashing in the brains of babies. Now, King Duncan, the king in place, is completely oblivious to what's going on. In fact, when he comes to visit, he says, "This castle hath a pleasant seat," which shows how blind he is to the truth. If you know anything at all about Oedipus the King, which we've talked about previously, that great tragic play, you'll see a lot of parallels with Macbeth. That just because one is given a prophecy, that doesn't necessarily mean that one needs to take action to make that prophecy come to fruition. And if one takes action, then what does that mean about that person? And ultimately, as well, vision and blindness in Oedipus the King, a major theme, could also be said to be somewhat applicable to Macbeth. And if nothing else, King Duncan, who's blind to the danger that he's walking into. We see Macbeth vacillate. He's going back and forth, talking about whether or not he's going to commit the murder. Lady Macbeth ultimately insults his manhood, and that's the way that she's able to manipulate Macbeth. That said, we find that Lady Macbeth either is brilliant in terms of manipulations, or she is weaker than she says she is. Because Lady Macbeth ultimately, even though she was going to participate in the murder of Duncan, says that she couldn't do it because Duncan resembled her father. So either already she's feeling guilt, the consequences of evil, or she understands this is a wonderful way to manipulate Macbeth so he's the one who gets his hands bloody literally and figuratively, and she doesn't have to do the dirty deed. But whether or not she actually commits murder or not, we know that the consequences are what this play is about, not the murder itself. And in fact, we see that one murder leads to another, leads to another. It snowballs, in effect. So, we know that this play could be a psychological investigation of madness. It could be ruled by hallucination. For instance, when Macbeth says, "Is this a dagger I see before me?" Is that a literal supernatural vision that he's seeing? Or is this a figment of his imagination and his guilt? And it can be played both ways. It almost reminds me of Hamlet and whether or not we talk about whether his madness was feigned or real. Macbeth ultimately has to become the killer, and he snowballs into, and this was a term that was used by one of my former Shakespearean professors, a killing machine. Now, of course, one of the things that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth decide to do is to try to make the crime appear to have been committed by Duncan's sons, because they have the biggest motive, and that they would probably want to take over their father's kingdom. And the fact that they flee afterwards, that doesn't make them seem innocent. The fact that Lady Macbeth faints during the accusation period either again illustrates that she is overcome with guilt, or she's a wonderful actor and she realizes that Macbeth, under the pressure, might end up confessing to the play or confessing to the murder rather than allowing the story to continue that Malcolm's sons or King Duncan's sons, Malcolm and Donalbain, are responsible for the murder. The drunken porter scene, and I think we've read enough Shakespearean plays to sort of expect something like this, where we have lower level characters who ultimately give astute observations. And we see this in the drunken porter scene. Note the idea of drunkenness. These characters are drunk with power and ultimately become drunk with evil as well. The drunken porter scene, I will talk a little bit more in greater depth, but it's definitely connected with what happens with Macbeth, as he himself is drunk with power. Nature itself is in discord. Remember when we saw this in Midsummer Night's Dream, when the fairies were arguing, nature itself was in discord. Well, here nature itself is in discord because the rightful king has been killed. And in this instance, we can't even talk about the fact that the king is or is not competent to be king, the way we did with Richard II. That this king has done nothing wrong, but Macbeth has decided that he needs to kill him in order to fulfill the witch's prophecy. So, as Macbeth becomes a killer, and we see how Banquo becomes more and more suspicious of his friend. After all, Banquo was with Macbeth when they had the initial prophecies. Macbeth decides that he needs to commission murders for Banquo. Notice how, again, this snowballs, where one action leads to another, leads to another. And then Banquo's son, Fleance, escapes those murderers. So now we see that at this point, Macbeth is ready to just kill anybody, including Banquo's family. So there is no rhyme or reason, if I can borrow an expression from Shakespeare, for the murders. Of course, Banquo's ghost haunts Macbeth, and we can talk about whether that's a literal ghost, or we can also talk about whether that is just a figment of Macbeth's imagination. A pivotal part of the play is that now Macbeth seeks out those witches. 3 witches, again, 3 is so important. 3 prophecies, again, 3 is so important. And this means that if we ever saw Macbeth as an innocent because he's approached initially by the witches, we certainly can't see that now. And at the time of the Renaissance, it would have been thought that the witches were indeed real entities, not just figments of his imagination. This is a society that believed in witches as much as it believed in fairies. And of course, one of Macbeth's prophecies is that he has to beware of Macduff. So we know exactly what's going to happen here is that, well, Macbeth wants to kill Macduff and Macduff's family. So again, we go on and on and on about how ultimately the idea of Macbeth having no boundaries whatsoever, he's willing to kill anyone and anything. And Macduff ends up going to England to test Malcolm's loyalty, one of King Duncan's sons, and Malcolm does pass the test. The murderers at this point kill kill Macduff's family because they can't find Macduff, because of course Macduff is in England. Macduff is the person that Macbeth is supposed to beware of. And the very famous speech with Lady Macbeth saying, "Out, out, damn spot." In other words, that you can never alleviate yourself of the guilt. And we see how this influences her insomnia, her inability to sleep or have any kind of peace whatsoever. And if you are taking any psychology class, then you know this is a classic example of obsessive compulsive disorder. And I've often talked about how Shakespeare is very much a early psychologist in many respects. And then Macbeth consults Seyton, Seyton. Notice that it sounds like Satan, Satan. It's done very deliberately, a little wink and a nod here, because Macbeth and Lady Macbeth have basically made their own kind of hell. The strong Lady Macbeth at the beginning of the play ultimately disintegrates into someone who commits suicide. And Macbeth's very famous speech that she should have died hereafter. So we see that he's gone from the dearest partner in greatness. There is a sense of affection and love with these two at the beginning of the play that's gone by the ending of the play, as Macbeth has become a cold-hearted murderer. And it turns out that the witch's prophecies are indeed true, that one not of woman born will ultimately defeat Macbeth. That happens to be Macduff. And how is he not of a woman born? Well, ultimately, he was born through a cesarean section, so he was not a product of natural childbirth. Notice how the natural and the unnatural are major themes in this particular drama. And, of course, when Dunstan Hill rises against you, and that seems to be impossible, but the soldiers are camouflaged as the forced, which, again, is how the natural world basically usurps the unnatural, Macbeth. And notice that the robes don't fit for Macbeth. In other words, that this is a role that he's playing. The ending of the play is a resolution where King Duncan's son Malcolm ultimately is going to become king, which is the fruition of the prophecy that Macbeth's heirs will not become king. And that said, Macbeth doesn't have any heirs in the play, which goes to show his hubris and his excessive ambition. So, as I said, I wanted you to spend about 12 minutes or so watching Ian McClellan talk about his portrayal of Macbeth in the Royal Shakespeare Company. And specifically, he's talking about the tomorrow speech. And where that leads us is talking about our attendance question, which will be due on Friday the 26th, and I plan on spending this weekend catching up on all of the attendance form responses. Did you like or dislike the Royal Shakespeare Company's 1976 performance of Macbeth, and why? Of course, a question that doesn't have a right or wrong answer. I'm just curious as to your impressions. I think this production is rather haunting. It's very dark and very disturbing. I actually like that kind of stuff, but of course I like Gothic literature, so perhaps that's one of the reasons why I find this play to be so appealing. This might be the play that you might decide to write a paper about, or it could be Richard II, or it could be our upcoming Othello. That said, you could, in theory, write about The Tempest, but keep in mind that we're really not going to be talking about The Tempest in class, so you wouldn't have the kind of background that you would have with the other plays. And the second paper is due by the very last day of class. Certainly you can hand in papers early, but the very last day of class would be our final examination for paper number 2. So again, going through some of the due dates, that would be the 8th of May, where paper number 2 would be due, and also any revisions that you might have done with paper number 1. And I will post the final on the 8th, which is Wednesday, at the time our class would normally meet, and that would be at 8:30. And you would have 24 hours in which to respond to that. So that would be due the following day at 8:30. Again, a series of essay questions that you get to choose from, and open book, open notes. But I'll talk a little bit more about the final exam as we get a little bit closer to the due date. So I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well, and we will continue on next class talking about some very famous quotes from Macbeth, and also preparing for Othello. Take care. Bye-bye.